welcome.
Thank you very much.
So we've got a nice and smooth 30-minute panel for you. We're just going to take questions from the audience, and then I hear you're going to be right next door shortly thereafter for a photo op with a friend of yours.
With a guy called Yoda.
Yes.
I don't know if you need. I don't think it's. Is it on?
I don't even know.
Yes, it's on now.
There we go.
Yes. You probably don't need it though, but so. Yes. Well, thank you for coming along here today. Good to see you all. And my first time here in Kansas City, so you've made me very, very welcome. So thank you.
Have you had any good barbecue since you've been in town?
I had a lovely meal last night. Yes.
Good.
Good. So yes. Went to had a great steak, so I'm really enjoying it. So and I think there's a nice meal tonight as well arranged. So.
Yes.
So looking forward to that.
Well, does anyone want to start off with the first question for us tonight? There we go.
So in the show Little Shop of Horrors, so what exactly made you want to make the puppet a plant? Because as the title doesn't say anything about, it's just a little shop of horrors. It could have been a magic shop, it could have been, I'm just asking, I just wanted to know.
Right, okay, well it wasn't my choice to make it a plant, but my choice was to work for director Frank Oz. And Little Shop of Horrors originally was a Jack Nicholson film that was shot over a weekend on other people's sets for very little money. And it became a Broadway stage production. And it was out of the Broadway stage production that they decided to make a film adaptation. And the Little Shop of Horrors, the horrors it's a flower shop, it's a plant shop. And the horror is the plants. But on that particular film, the real challenge was to bring the character to life that had no eyes. Because most of the animatronics up to then, the soul's in the eyes, you're always told. In animation, when you look at an actor. So Michael Caine says, never blink on a close-up because it disconnects you from the audience. So it's all about the eyes. There were no eyes on Audrey 2. So it had to be, the puppet had to be designed so that physical body language could express a lot of emotion. And a lot of that was in the lips. So it was probably the most sophisticated puppet of its day. And it took 6 months with us rehearsing to get to a level where we could deliver the performances. It was that difficult. And does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So is that the most difficult?
It's one of the most difficult. The last version of Audrey 2 was, we called the Mean Green Mother plant because it was the biggest one. And that took 65 puppeteers on the biggest day. Because there's the main plant, there's all the lips, there's all the vines. And the vines often would take 2 puppeteers to operate a single vine. And then there's the singing pods, and that all took lots of puppeteers. So it was an amazing amount of coordination and trying to make sure that the performances were correct. Because Frank Oz, the puppeteer, was directing this, and he wanted everything perfect. So I think the most takes we did was 85 takes on one, but typically we'd be doing like 20, 30 takes to get the lip sync just right. Because there was like 16 people working together, and Frank wouldn't accept it until it was perfect. So, that was pretty tough for everybody to get right. So, yeah. Yes.
What was your favorite puppet to puppeteer?
Favorite puppet? Well, it's tough. I mean, because I started with Yoda on Empire Strikes Back. I was 19, and I had taken over from Frank Oz. So that as a starting point in my film career, it's got to be on the top list of that. I loved performing Jabba the Hutt because he was my first chief puppeteer role, where I was in charge of the team of puppeteers, and it was my voice that everyone was trying to sync to when we were performing as a team of puppeteers. So that was amazing. And they were both Star Wars, so that was great. I also loved performing Sprocket the Dog on Fraggle Rock. quite the opposite side. And I got to perform in 3 different styles because Jim had this genius idea of making international versions of Fraggle Rock appear that they were made in that country. So the Doc and Sprocket segments were refilmed in France, in Germany, in England and in Norway. So the viewers of that country thought it was a show made by them in their country. So I got to perform Sprocket in England, and he was really quite like a real dog. He was very much more subdued. In Germany, they wanted an absolute copy of the original Canadian version. So I literally copied the original, which was Steve Whitmire. Shot for shot, they actually did it shot for shot on exactly the same set, the dimensions, but we were just dressed to be Bavarian. So that was a really good teaching lesson to copy Steve Whitmire's performance exactly. And then the English version was very realistic dog. And then I did it in France, and it was way cartoony, it was like huge. So I had this amazing experience of having the same puppet perform in 3 different styles, which was again just an amazing learning experience and developing a character in 3 different ways for 3 different audiences. So that was a magical time, and it's all in that same period. But since then I've enjoyed Mr. Tinkles from the Cats and Dogs movies. He was so much fun to perform. And just recently being Wile E. Coyote for Coyote versus Acme. Yes.
You said Yoda was towards the beginning of your career. Was that your very first one?
It was Yoda was my very first movie job. So being a second generation puppeteer, I'd spent all my childhood puppeteering with my folks. I had my own puppet show.
I was going to ask, how did you get into it?
Oh yes, so I'm answering that question as well. I must know that you're going to answer. So yeah, so I was, and I loved it. I loved puppetry. I wasn't one of the kids that didn't like what their parents did. I absolutely loved it, and got really into it. Made my own puppets, did my own puppet shows. Had my own Punch and Judy show, which was a gift from my parents for my 8th birthday. So I had the full puppet theatre and a set of puppets for an 8-year-old kid. So, and loved it, and did loads of shows for school friends and at school. And so I made a few pounds back in England doing that. But I also got interested into the Planet of the Apes, and wanted to do cosplay before it was even called cosplay. So I did a live cast of my face, sculpted the ape masks on there, did the plaster mold, did it in latex, and then glued it to my face, made the wigs and the costumes and everything. So, and then we used a standard 8 cine camera to film our little home movies with the apes. So I definitely wanted to get into films and into TV. Although I was still doing the live puppeteering with my parents, it was the film and TV that interested me. And I got a lucky break to meet Stuart Freeborn, who was the makeup supervisor on the Star Wars films.
Okay.
A week later, he offered me a job on being on the Yoda team. So I was just so lucky. I was just so lucky. And I did see Star Wars when it was released in 1977, which was December in the UK, and I was there on the first opening weekend. My friend's father had got us tickets. I don't know how he did that. So, but we at the end of the film, we both said we have to be in the film industry. That it changed our entire mindset of what we were going to do for our career. I said something like, "Oh, I wish I could work on something like that." And oddly enough, 2 years later, I had. My friend, it took him another 5 years later still, and he actually came in as a runner on Labyrinth. So I said, "Oh yeah, this guy coming in." I said, "Oh, I know him. You can count on him." I said, "I don't know if my recommendation held any water or anything, but he got on the film, and then he ended up in the film industry ever since and directing things. So we both found our passions, and our wishes came true."
How challenging was all the puppetry involved in Labyrinth?
Right, well, Labyrinth was interesting, yeah, because there was, Jim was wanting to he was always pushing the envelope on everything that could be done with puppeteering, and we were moving more towards servo-controlled motors in the head rather than cables. That was a benefit for not having to have lots of people around you, but of course it weighed more. So then every puppet was heavier. But also we were in a point where this was well before any computer animation. So for something like Didymus, we needed multiple versions of Sir Didymus. So Jim liked the way I approached marionettes because I did that a lot as a kid. So he asked me to build a special hybrid servo-controlled marionette of Didymus. So he could move like a hand puppet, but be on strings. So that was, again, pushing into carbon fiber technologies and new servo motors and just working out how to do this puppet. And I devised a special little crank at the back of the control where all the strings would come up and wrap around the control. I don't think anyone had done before, so I could change the length of the strings between shots, because every shot was a different length. And it's like, normally, when I worked on Team America, you would just cut the strings and tie them all new strings, but that would take ages. And so I many, many years before then, like 25 years before, I'd already worked out how to do it with a wind-up control, so it would be practical. So always trying to think ahead of what's going to be needed on camera. And so we had the huge character Ludo. Tim Wheeler was the main puppet builder for that, and they were using Kevlar and carbon fiber cloths to put into special fiberglass molds to make the actual shape of Ludo. And then he had a special hand knitted, it was like a knitting machine, but that was for all his fur, specially handmade. And it took months and months and months of feeding in all this hair and then even knotting in other hairs afterwards. So just getting it, and this was a four-way stretch like a fur that they would put on the surface of him so it would all move properly. So really developing technology far beyond what you would imagine would be used on the screen to bring these characters to life. So yeah, there was a lot of hidden work that you wouldn't really appreciate was there.
Because for Didymus, you had to have like the real dog that he was on, and then you had like a puppet dog.
Yes, well, yeah, because Didymus was riding a dog, so they English sheepdog, and there's a hand puppet version as well, so that the dog could actually react in a specific way. I think there are two versions of that puppet. Then there's a hand puppet version of Didymus, and every puppet has different limbs, so that you can put in different hands, different rigs, different kinds of arms, different bodies, so that you can either work through the stomach, work through the back, or work through from underneath. So depending on what the shot was. Okay. And then we had also what would just be called a stuffy, which was like for stunts. We also had a sprung-loaded version that would sit onto the saddle for the real dog, so that it would actually move with the movement of the real dog. And then we had the full marionette, which was operated from above. So combining all of those, we were able to give a sense of one complete character. Because if it was just a Muppet, you could only really see it like a hand puppet. You could only see it from the waist upwards. And so this way you got to see all versions of it and trick the eye and the audience to think it's just one puppet.
So, you said Yoda was your top first favorite. Who was your least favorite to play?
Oh, least favorite. Now, I've never been asked that before. Least favorite to play. Well, I guess it has to be Blorp from Lost in Space. Because we knew it was never going to make the film. The Jim Henson Creature Shop had made this little alien that changed colour. That was part of I think we filmed it in '97. So it was the Gary Oldman, Matt LeBlanc reboot of Lost in Space, and there was a little alien called Blorp. And I think most of us thought, we don't really like the look of this thing anyway. And the puppet was really hard to operate, and they wanted incredibly long rods for the rod puppeteering of the arms and the legs. In my opinion, far longer than they needed to be. But it was just like, why are we doing this? You know, it's like this. We're spending all this effort, and the puppeteers everyone is doing their best. And I was just like, no, this is going to be completely replaced with CG. And it was. But the interesting thing was, it was replaced by the Jim Henson Creature Shop. The same guys that had made the actual puppet. And a year or so before, I'd been headhunted by Pixar, by Ed Catmull, to go and join them to be an animator. And I was very interested, and I had a little bit of experience with CGI animation. But at the time, it didn't seem the right time to move with my family. My 2 boys were in school, and I still think I wanted to do a bit more with animatronics. But suddenly now there's this opportunity at the Creature Shop, Blorp's coming in as an animation character. So I actually ended up animating some of Blorp on Lost in Space. And actually I felt I enjoyed that more than the puppet. It still didn't look very good. They didn't change the design enough. So, but no, it was an interesting situation where I thought, oh well, that's it. We'll never see any of the puppet work. And in the end, I actually contributed to the CG. So. Yes.
Tell us a little bit about the Hoggle puppet from Labyrinth and what happened to him after production.
Oh, Hoggle, yes. Well, Hoggle was sculpted by Val Charlton, and she'd worked on things like Time Bandits. She worked on the Landstriders on Dark Crystal. Wonderful sculptor, and she also worked later on Baron Munchausen. But for Hoggle, she sculpted the Hoggle face. Engineer Tony Dunsterville created the mechanisms for it, and that was quite a challenge because it was very close to Sherry Wise's face, and the eyes were very close. So typically you would have linkages to drive the eyes. So he had to come up with a closed loop internal system with cables to actually even be able to make the eyes move in the position they were in the head. So it was a really tricky, again, a difficult mechanical problem, but I think he worked pretty well. So Sherry Weiser was inside Hoggle, a small person, and she, they tried initially giving her a video monitor, but it was very difficult to see what was going on. It was a very poor picture, very grainy, it was very confusing. So in the end she didn't do that. So she just looked out through the mouth. So that's often why, oh, yeah, oh, ah. Hoggle's making noises to allow the mouth to be open so that she could see where she was going. So that's, again, you find that a lot on the animatronic creatures. You'll find if the performers are looking through the mouth, they will make noises so that the mouth can open. And so it had Brian Henson doing the voice, Jim Henson's son, and controlling the radio control jaw, and I think they had Dave Greenaway doing the eyes. I can't remember who's doing the eyebrows. Maybe Donald Dustin. Anyway, no, and Rob Tigner, I think. Rob Tigner. Anyway, so a team of puppeteers, whole team doing the face. They all had to work together, and then Sherry inside. So it really was a very difficult thing to do. I don't think anything had been attempted quite that sophisticated, with, again, all using full radio control. And back then, the radio control, these days you move the control and the servos move in perfect timing, but back then you move the control and zzz, the servo would move after. There was quite a bit of latency. So that took a whole new way of approaching. You almost had to perform before you needed to, so that it was working at the right time. So that was a whole different mindset to try and bring the performances. Yeah, Sir Didymus's eyebrows were really slow, so I actually had to make the move before they were needed. You know, so because I did some work on Didymus eyebrows, and so it's like, God, it was tough. It was tough. So, and then, yeah, I think at the end of production.